Good afternoon, everyone. This is Bob Celeste from the Center for Supply Chain Studies, and we'll start our presentation now. Just to let everyone know that this will be sort of just a presentation and an introduction, and so welcome to the introduction of our upcoming blockchain for cold chain study. You will all be invited also to a series of pre-launch calls where we'll have more interaction and be able to work through a number of areas before the study actually takes place. But I did want to today talk a little bit about what the study will entail, the type of things that we'll go through, and how we go through that. Before we start, I just want to remind everyone that all calls and meetings for the center are under an antitrust caution in that we don't talk about deal making, selling, promoting, or any of those topics. Even though today this is just sort of a broadcast, in any of our meetings, if you feel, or calls, if you feel that we're getting into those areas, please let us know and we'll table the conversation until we speak to counsel. For those of you who are new to the center is a neutral nonprofit corporation, and we work with the entire supply chain to explore very complex topics and supply chain situations and provide some education on those topics also. We typically work, as you'll see, in a virtual environment for our initial exploratory studies and then move out to pilots, and you'll see a little bit of that in a minute. So I wanted to talk a little bit about, for those again who are unfamiliar with how the center works, some of the studies that we've accomplished at the center and we'll be doing going forward. Talk a little bit about how we'll leverage some of the work that's been done in previous studies, and that really is going to help, especially with this study, help greatly get us to a point where we can actually start focusing on cold chain and sensor technologies. And then I'd like to talk about the study in itself and then some next steps that will take place over the next few weeks. So studies at the center, we have a number of studies that we have accomplished and that we'll be doing over the next year or so. Last year we did a study in the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and Master Data Management. That study is available on our website in the form of a white paper, and that really helps along with the next study that we had started in January, which was the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and blockchain, where we looked at some of the features of that law that will come into play in the year 2023 and so on, and whether blockchain could be useful in addressing some of those features. We also benefited from the work of the previous study, the Master Data Management study, and you can see that in some of the reference models that we built in that study. There will be a phase 2 of the DSCSA and blockchain study where we'll actually take the work that the original group did and move that out into pilots so we can start to demonstrate some of the technology, some of the challenges, and some of the benefits of the technology. But for today, we'll be talking about the blockchain and cold chain study that we're proposing. Within the center, anyone can propose a study, and we will, if you have an idea for a study, we will work with you to formulate that study and who may be interested in it. And typically we create some draft goals and definitions around the study and a roadmap, and then start to develop a charter for the study so we can move forward. So a charter actually starts as sort of a draft charter, maybe a prospectus, and then as we move into actually our pre-launch, which will be the next series of calls that we have with interested parties, we firm up the scope of the study and what we'll be addressing in the study, and that firms up a very comprehensive study charter that we will work toward. And in that charter, it talks about how we work together, how we handle intellectual property, how we handle other aspects of it, and what we will produce in the study. That study charter informs us as we move along with the study. At the end of every study, the group develops a number of things. Could be a number of things. Could be a white paper. Typically, there is a white paper, some education modules, and also the reference models that I'll talk about in a minute. All of that is published on our website, and it's open to all to use. So a little bit on, I guess, the topic of going fast by going slow, and in other words, leveraging some of the work from previous studies. I did mention this sort of virtual environment that we work in, and I'll explore that a little bit as we move forward into this part of it. So, as I said before, we had a DSCSA, or Drug Supply Chain Security Act, and Master Data Management study, and that study was helpful in framing how to collect data throughout the supply chain: static data, data about products, data about trading partners, and then more dynamic data of transactions and production data, and manage that appropriately. We leverage that in our other studies, and certainly we'll leverage that in this particular study. But our next study was around the Drug Supply Chain Security Act and blockchain, and essentially seeing if that technology could be useful for being able to trace back through the supply chain for a particular drug. The work that we did there, which was to delve into the intricacies of the supply chain, the intricacies of services that are available to the supply chain for transactional data, and also the blockchain area. And lastly, and probably first actually, is data governance and how that could work and how that could be applied to blockchain or database technologies. All of that, as you'll see in the next few slides, is going to be available to this study to leverage. So we'll be looking at connecting some of that information to the work that we do in the cold chain study. In our previous study, and this is just an example of the types of things that we would produce, and so you can kind of imagine what we may do in a cold chain or sensor technology study, is we identified a number of issues that we wanted to address in our previous study. So, for example, establishing electronic connections between non-adjacent trading partners or all trading partners, establishing trust between those trading partners before they start to exchange information, sharing information without inadvertently exposing other information that you didn't intend to, reducing activities within the supply chain and within each trading partner, and then designing beyond just regulatory compliance. So if you look at these, I'd say at least 1 through 4, even 5, could apply and most likely will apply to our cold chain study. In other words, in order to share cold chain data electronically, we need to be able to establish electronic connections between trading partners so we can leverage the work that we did in our previous study into this study. Certainly establishing trust and sharing information without inadvertently exposing other data. So depending on who should actually be seeing some of the sensor data, how that's shared, a lot of that work we've gone through in our previous study that we can leverage in this current study. And lastly, obviously, to reduce the potential activity within the supply chain in order to, when we're trying to share this kind of information. Number 6, I didn't mention much of. In our current study, we wanted to address funding. We probably will hold off on that until we get to a little bit further work on that area. But that will also be essential to this current study in how you pay for the architecture that would allow sensor data to be shared within the supply chain. One of the things that we created in our last study, which I think will be helpful in this study in framing some of the things that need to be addressed in order to be able to share cold chain data or sensor data in a supply chain that's as complex as the pharmaceutical supply chain in the US, is this model that we've created. And essentially, there's a lot that goes on into each one of these blocks, and that will be brought forward for us. But just to give you a sense of, we addressed governance, data sharing, governance within the context of the previous study, and I would think that certainly we would have that discussion in sharing cold chain data or any sensor data. Then how do we apply those rules, those data governance rules, to an area where we would be pooling data on sensors, so the data persistence submodel. And so we worked through that in our previous study, and I think that all of that information and all of those processes will be helpful in us getting a leg up on how to do all this. Certainly services, as far as cold chain services that are available, sensor technologies, and then the supply chain itself and the intricacies and the nuances that occur within the supply chain, the different kinds of trading partners, how they trade, what kind of rules do they work under. Those things will also be helpful to our discussion and our study. In the previous study, we talked about how to move data up into that data persistence area, the blockchain area, if you will. That information will be available to us in our study in order to piggyback on sensor kind of information. We also have worked through how to extract or bring down that data from the blockchain area through services, and that'll also be helpful in our study. We'll also be able to leverage some of the definition of terms that we've created, governance rules, process flows, data attribute definitions, and how to query or retrieve information. Of course, all of that will need to be adjusted somewhat for the cold chain discussion, but it does form a large body of work that we can leverage. As we move forward in our previous studies, I talked about the virtual environment. We use simulation software to simulate the supply chain, so simulate the behavior of the supply chain partners that we've identified, and there may be many. There may be, in our study, we may be dealing with manufacturers, contract manufacturers, 3PLs, wholesalers, retail dispensers, hospital dispensers, and so on. So we've documented quite a bit of that interaction. Now, in the previous studies, we were dealing mostly with solid dose movements and not really anything in particular around cold chain storage and movement of that kind of information. But in this study, we can leverage that. We've got a large body of information on how the supply chain works, how each of the trading partners interact with each other, the movement of product through the supply chain. And so in our virtual environment or our simulation environment, we'll be able to leverage the supply chain submodels that we've created. Likewise, we've also created submodels for data persistence, if you will, blockchain, and also for data governance and also for services. So those areas will also be able to bring forward into this study and augment them or adjust them for the purposes of cold chain or sensor technology. Now, these simulations, which we call reference models, the reason we call them reference models is that we work with the supply chain partners to verify that we are fairly representing the processes that take place in the supply chain, so they can be referenced. These simulations, when we run them, they actually create data based on our inputs. So supply chain data could be ordering data. In the case of our study, we'll also be incorporating sensor data. So we're going to go through some processes to identify the kind of data that sensors, different kinds of sensors, loggers, if you will, capture, what it looks like and how we might be able to share it, and also around the point of confidentiality, how to protect that data. But we will be producing a lot of data through our simulations or our virtual environment. In our last study, and I imagine this will take place in our cold chain study, we identified a number of different ways or models ways that information could be moved through the supply chain and through blockchain, for example. Similarly, I would imagine in our cold chain study, we will identify a number of different ways that information can move and how information could be served to various trading partners through services. So I would see the same type of thing occurring, and we certainly can leverage some of the learnings that we had from our previous studies. So let's talk about this particular study of blockchain for cold chain. And initially, we're talking about cold chain temperature sensing, but I think we can expand this a bit, if we will, or if needed, to other kinds of sensor data that may be collected in the supply chain and valuable for trading partners to have and be able to work with. So the concept is, I think, pretty simple. Define or identify a common set of cold chain temperature sensor data. And there is a large body of this information available through a number of organizations and standards bodies. And so we will leverage that information for our study. We will, through a number of models, demonstrate the movement and the use from trading partners and their reaction to temperature data. So we will have models where we are demonstrating when something maybe goes out of range, and then what's the expectation as far as how the trading partner should react to that. So a trading partner that's receiving a product and that temperature's gone out of range, we could model that product going into quarantine and then being sent back or sent to a destruction facility. So we will be able to model that kind of activity, and then the data that's necessary to document that activity. We're going to explore, obviously, with the title of the study, the use of blockchain technology and how it may provide benefits, and we will work through whether the benefits and the challenges with the technology in terms of capturing and sharing cold chain data, temperature sensor data. We're going to look at a number of different ways that temperature sensor data can be provided from sensors, data loggers, online sensors, any other types that we can gather data from, and how they might be incorporated into the blockchain, if you will, and shared with the appropriate trading partners. So let's just take a look at how this may go about. And again, this is about leveraging the work that we've done in previous studies and adjusting them for this particular environment of cold chain and temperature sensing data. So we've already developed a number of models, and again, these are also in simulation environments, so we could actually run them and learn from them. How to move information from the supply chain up through services and into, if you will, the blockchain or the data persistence area. What we're talking about here now is leveraging that work and possibly adjusting that work based on the needs for sensor information by adding more services to the model, in a sense, sensor services. And then how do we manage that data and provide that up into, in this case, a blockchain to be married with other data that may be there that trading partners may be retrieving already. So in a sense, leveraging what we've already created in a previous study, and now layering on top of that another feed that would interact with or be associated with the products as they move through the supply chain. So we'll work through this as we go through our pre-launch calls as far as fine-tuning our goal here, and also within the study itself in how do we capture that data, what is the data that's being captured, how do we marry that with other data that exists. So just some of the benefits, and I'm sure there are more than these, but from a supply chain partner standpoint, this could provide a common channel to incorporate sensor data with the channel that will already exist, that they're already going to be sharing data about the transactions of product as it moves through the supply chain. Maybe be better able to determine if sensor data is available, so being able to signal whether that data is available, able to use sensor data with others in the supply chain. So this may open up opportunities if data is more easily available to share within in the supply chain. In our discussions, we may start to uncover other opportunities for using sensor data. From a sensor technology point of view, or information services companies, being able to provide data from your sensors in a common non-proprietary channel to incorporate that data may be better able to serve customers that are already interconnected through the existing or soon to be existing data architecture that's being envisioned. So a way of marrying this data to other data that's already being exchanged. So we'll be able to leverage a lot of the previous work that we've done. We'll be able to leverage not only the overall architecture and some of the submodels that have been created, but also the work that's inside of those. So, and a lot of this is based on our previous study under Drug Supply Chain Security Act, but we could leverage some of the workings of that and how to create rules for sharing information, who gets to see what, rules around confidentiality, so we're better able to then express the data in a way that can be shared between trading partners that should be seeing the data and not be seen by anyone else. We'll also be able to look at some of the submodels that we've already created that include a single blockchain, multiple blockchains, cloud databases, or some sort of combination. We'll be able to discuss and explore how the data immutability and scalability could be some of the benefits there and some of the challenges with blockchain technology, confidentiality, as I mentioned before, how we take some of the governance rules that this study may develop and how that would be incorporated and expressed in an architecture or a system. Within the supply chain, we do have models that show forward reverse logistics, error corrections, querying or retrieving data. And we also have some sort of nefarious activities also going on in some of our submodels that we're able to use. And that might be interesting from our point of view of possibly not nefarious activity as far as illegitimate or counterfeit product, but maybe things that go out of range. How do you track that? How do you alert for that type of thing? There's also a number of policies that we've incorporated in previous studies that we may be able to leverage, such as inference. So if there, and again, this could be applying also to sensor technology, that if there's a sensor in a case, that we can infer that all of the items in the case, or can we, and that'll be a question that we'll actually discuss, can the temperature monitoring of that sensor be applied to all the items in the case? So we'll have those kind of discussions. And then again, as I mentioned before, some of our models are very simple. They may only have a manufacturer, a wholesaler, and a dispenser. Others are more complex that add contract manufacturers, 3PL activity, and differentiate between hospital pharmacies, retail pharmacies, and so on. Lastly, we'll talk about the services area, and in this case, adding sensor services, if you will, and how that might work with the overall architecture. There's also some performance metrics from our previous studies that may be helpful to us, at least being able to understand the amount of data that may be provided by sensors and what that could mean if scaled across the supply chain, and certainly the timing to be able to post that information and retrieve it, and some of the constraints that exist within the supply chain based on how the supply chain partners do their business and operate. Again, we can take a lot of the simulations that we've already created and start to augment them to look more like a cold chain supply chain, if you will, and some of the information that's being collected off the sensors and how that's treated, what the data looks like, how we protect that data. So there's a lot of, as I said before, there's a lot of things that are inside of our simulation, such as process flows, data attribute definitions that we can leverage in this study itself. So as far as timing goes, we're looking at in the fall, as we are in the fall right now, we're starting to organize the study. We will move from this intro webinar into pre-launch phase, where we'll have more interactive sessions where we can talk about the feature set, the selection, the scope of the study itself. We're looking toward the study to start to move in earnest in the winter, and then in the spring wrap up the study and possibly move into pilots. So a little on what's next over the next few weeks. Again, as I talked about before, we do have a process that we go through. So we'll be moving into pre-launch calls where we'll have more interaction over the next few weeks. We will publish these set of slides and also the recording for this on our website. We'll move into pre-launch calls where we can have a little bit more back and forth discussion around the scope and some of the benefits and some of the things that you'd like to see coming out of the study. And then we'll move into launching the study itself. The pre-launch time frame is helpful in that it allows you to kind of craft the study a little bit to your needs and have some cross dialogue between the supply chain trading partners that will be on the study and the technology providers. It also allows a little bit of time to work through the paperwork and the agreements to be part of the study. Unfortunately, because this is just a webinar, I can't open up the mics for you. If you do have any questions, though, about what we've talked about, please feel free to contact me either through phone or through my email. On the web, we will publish, as I said before, this presentation and the recording of it so you can go through it again. If you need any more further information, though, or help in understanding the study, please feel free to contact me. And again, you will all be invited to the pre-launch calls, and I hope that you attend those because that'll be a very interesting discussion as we go back and forth in further defining and fine-tuning the parameters of the study and the scope of the study. So I hope that was helpful for you to understand at least preliminary about the study and how we'll go forward and what we'll start to tackle in the study and the kind of things that we will bring to the study as far as material that's already been developed. With that, I'll end the call now. Please look forward to invites for the pre-launch calls, and I hope you attend those. And also, as I said, this material will be on our website most likely by the end of today, and you can download the slides and also view the presentation again if you like. So thank you for being part of this. I know it's getting toward the end of Friday afternoon. Thanks for your time, and I look forward to working with you.